Manhwa title in the right corner of the screen. Enjoy watching. Abel Delafian is one of the most famous personalities in the kingdom. She tops the royal media rankings as the lady who should never be equaled. Also, a notorious troublemaker who no one dares to cross. Titles, labels don't matter to her. The only thing that still matters now is that today she will officially go on a date with her dearest friend, First Prince Cesar Lagracio. It was at this point that she decided to admit that she liked him because she was sure it was mutual. And it was true, he really liked her too. Then Eve suggested that we start officially dating from that day on, but suddenly Sasha turns her down. Of course, her feelings for him are very happy, but now is not the time. He was about to go somewhere, but Eve wouldn't let him leave, for there had been a huge misunderstanding in the conversation, and it needed to be talked over again. Cesar explained that he couldn't date her now because he wasn't good enough for that and needed to have excellent qualifications. After all, she herself said that if you love someone, you should be willing to sacrifice your life and slay a dragon to win the heart of your lover. So, he will do his best and defeat the dragon. He will be the perfect man for her. Still, he was glad he'd gotten to see her before he left. They parted at that moment, and he went to fight the dragon. Abel didn't understand why the hell he went dragon hunting in the era of tranquility. To make it clear why she was so determined to have a relationship with Cesar, and why he had gone dragon hunting so suddenly, you have to go back many, many years to Abel's 10th birthday party. That day she celebrated with her father and younger brother. Then she asked where the present was. A cake was brought to her. She had to blow out the candles and make a wish. Then her thoughts were to ask for a new dress or maybe a small donkey. But the moment she blew out the candles on the cake her family had prepared, it was the moment she remembered the secret of this world and immediately voiced her desire to go to the royal palace. This is the romantic fantasy world she read in her past life. In that novel, the black-haired villain rebelled, and the Delafian family was wiped out without a trace. Reincarnation is that, or something else, since right now, she, Abel, won't let that happen. Memories came back to her, and she started saying that she absolutely had to go to the royal palace. Her father and brother tried to talk her out of it because she was too young for that, and it was better to let her ask for something else. Her brother even suggested she play their favorite game. Whoever wins gets the deepest hole. They still saw her as a child and obviously weren't going to agree, but Abel wasn't about to give up. Suddenly she ran, took an axe, and ran into the backyard garden. Her father ran after her as it could have been dangerous and didn't understand why she was doing all this at all. The girl confidently held the axe. She wanted to protect her precious family and beautiful life, so she needed to get to the royal palace at all costs before the darkness consumed the villain. Then she gave her daddy a choice. Either she bends this tree that holds the memories of her mom, or he sends her to the palace. And so she set about changing the future. When they rode into the palace, all the way her father told her many rules on how to behave, and he repeated them several times, one and the same, because he knew Belle could not be a quiet child. She had talked him into going to the palace, and she knew that the other kids bragged about visiting the palace when they turned 10, and she didn't want to be of lower status than the others. It ended with her father now driving her to the palace and worrying more than her because he doesn't trust her and can only pray that everything goes smoothly. He knows her too well. Abel didn't want to let him down and act inappropriately, but this is a huge step towards a more significant act of a loving daughter. So she already had a plan. In order to change the future, she needs to meet a potential antagonist. It's all part of the grand plan to establish a good daughter. When they arrived at the courtyard, appropriately enough, he started introducing Abel to people he knew himself. And eventually he didn't notice her running away very quietly and unnoticed. It was the perfect start to her plan. Except there's a small problem. She turned to the opposite side of the main gate and now has no idea where she is or where the antagonist is. The key events are vague. What about the location of his childhood residence? Abel, of course, knew nothing about it. So she decided to try another method and think where the ruler might have left the despicable, illegitimate child. To find out, she decided to climb a tree first. It is said that by physical effort, the mind can be freed from many difficulties. The first principle may be behind the one who will exterminate all who displease him for it in the future, but for the moment, he is just a child who has lost favor with kings. They're probably about the same age, so his location is pretty predictable. It will be the most remote spot near the palace, a deserted crime zone. Sitting high up in a tree, she saw this outhouse and was already thinking about how to get inside, climbing in through the window, or going in officially. All she knows is that the first prince destroyed his entire family. Before that can happen, Abel must meet her antagonist wife, who is dark in this world, and then create a close relationship and instill morals. In the name of all the lieges of regression, obsession, and reincarnation of this world, when the king commands, there is no other option but to obey. Abel decided to make a quick dash to the outhouse by jumping right over the tree branches. But it turned out the tree was farther away than she thought, and she ended up missing the jump. When she fell from such a height, she hit hard too, but surprisingly she fell on something soft. At first she couldn't get up, but then she lifted her head and found herself face to face with some boy. He was wary and thought it was an assassin, but then he saw it was a child or just a person pretending to be a child. This guy had a lot of suspicions, and he was clearly unhappy that someone had fallen on him from a tree. As soon as he said away, she moved a few meters away from him. Abel took a closer look at him. That black hair, rarely seen in the kingdom, and eyes that were a shade of green in her head. She knew at once that this was the first principal, but she asked nonetheless. She began to wonder aloud, is he not hiding his identity because it's already been revealed, or is he just cocky? Because of this, there was a misunderstanding. He immediately realized that she was stupid, and she admitted that she wasn't brilliant with intelligence. Abel looked at him the rest of the time. They were exactly the same age in height and appearance, and Belle thought about how to match him. But boy, because she was biding her time to cut off his head, there was too much distrust of her in him. Abel said she wasn't interested in his neck. An assassin didn't threaten her family. She wasn't going to kill anyone. These misunderstandings had to be sorted out to prevent a terrible catastrophe. He still believed she was the killer and planned to jump out of the tree and crush it. When she thought of strategies, she didn't consider those situations where the conversation might go in the wrong direction. Abel had promised about her sister Sana to me to use this method, but now the situation was complicated, so she asked the prince how old he was. Even in a world where status is paramount, a man instinctively yields before a being who is older and stronger than he is. The difference of a year or two is felt when someone is younger, so Abel asked how long he had been in this world. She was sure he was a year or two younger, but he said he was about to turn 12, and Abel realized that he would abolish this method of age division after all. She decided to simply tell him that she had celebrated her birthday a few days ago, and had come to the palace in honor of the occasion, but had gotten lost. Now age is the real innocence, cuteness, and ignorance, so she knows nothing about this palace and prince. She introduced him and expected a reciprocal unfamiliarity, but somehow he was in no hurry to tell her anything about himself. Her family is very little known because her father was the first in the family to be given a baronial title. She has no deep roots, but even so she considers herself nice and good enough. The prince looked at her with disappointment. She was acting like this to him, as if he were stupid. There are no villains in this world without history, and even if history doesn't exempt them from war. If there was no history to begin with, the future could have been very different. Abel really wanted to instill the right values in this principle during the abrupt years so that he would have a chance to be a good person. Abel remained strong. Her action depended on the lives of her family members, so she tried very hard to keep the conversation calm. Cesar continued to suspect that she was an assassin or had been one from the beginning. Abel couldn't take it anymore and shouted loudly that she wasn't. He seemed to believe and calm down, and then she calmly asked him what this place was, and where. Did he really live there? Prince, you tuned out again if you think about it. How did she know he was a prince, since ordinary people don't even know what he looks like, let alone his face? Abel quickly found the answer. He was too handsome to be an ordinary man. Plus her scholarly hair color with looks like that, he couldn't be anything but a prince. Then he thought she was only acting so cocky because she knew who he was. Abel didn't understand why he thought that. After all, she takes etiquette lessons every other day and has excellent manners. He didn't understand. She was stupid and she just didn't have a conscience. If she was talking about manners, then why was climbing bough trees? Fortunately, she did not break any twigs, but she seemed to have hurt herself. Her forehead was bleeding. The prince saw this and said, but he wasn't even going to ask if she was in pain or offer help or call someone. He just didn't understand why he had to do it. He doesn't care about anyone else's pain. Her pain is only her own business, just as his pain is only his concern. Abel was disappointed with this creepily depressing answer for a child. The problem was no longer the flaws in the class systems, it was the failure of her upbringing. What kind of life must a man have if he has such thoughts at the age of 12? It's not too late. It's just a lack of experience, and you can start filling those voids from today. Abel explained Principle 2. When someone is in pain, the right thing to do is to ask if they are okay, even if they are not loved ones. And in a case like this one, when the wound is already bleeding, the prince should offer a handkerchief, if he has one, to stop the bleeding. The prince didn't understand why he should do this, and Abel didn't have time to explain. She heard her father calling her, and only now she remembered him. She had to go now, but still she offered to be friends with the prince. As a child, friendship is very important. So without getting an answer, she quickly left, but promised that they would meet again. The prince didn't even have time to say anything. Now he might not understand what to do when someone was bleeding, but that didn't mean it had to stay that way forever. Now that they had met, Abel would slowly work through his problems. Just at that moment, she was relieved and turned back to her father, but she didn't even think she would end up at tea with the king. The king was very nice and asked her how she liked her trip to the palace. The king couldn't believe that the count's daughter had already grown up so fast. And if he warned her about the visit, the king would find a suitable place for them to stay longer. The count didn't even think of bothering the palace staff with his personal questions, and the king was upset, but learned that blood would answer like this. He had once saved the king in his younger days, so they seemed to have a good relationship. But he had an unexpected tea party and completely forgot his business. Surely this is the king. Abel didn't expect him to ever hold them so close to him. The king was very upset. "What is it, sweet face? Is the leader hurt?" And he began to ask what had happened. Abel didn't want to tell much, only saying that it happened nearby, and so on. The king's face immediately changed, and with a cold voice, he ordered the first prince to be brought in. He was just in the neighborhood, so he quickly came to his father's house. The king threw the fork at him with a sharp movement. It hit him right in the face and left a severe scratch. The king was angry at his son for daring to dishonor the family. Abel was in shock. She didn't know what to say. What had happened? What was it? Why had the king thrown a fork at him and was now screaming? Abel had heard that the king disliked the first prince, and that the cold treatment of the palace made him rapidly turn into a villain. But this was too unpredictable an act. The king said, "My knight's daughter was wounded and the first prince was present there, so he blamed him for it." Abel felt like she had water in her mouth. She had never encountered such a situation, but it was obvious that this old man was unreasonable to accuse a person on nothing. Improper methods of discipline have a huge impact on personal development, but this is not discipline in the speed room, and the king was about to hit his own son right in front of other people. Abel screamed loudly and asked the king to stop because the prince had done nothing wrong, and it was her own fault for getting lost without listening to her father. Abel gathered that she had never met the prince before, so he had nothing to do with the situation. Abel tried to act very dignified to win this battle. She said that if the prince had seen that she had hurt herself, he would have gladly helped. But he just didn't see it. Daddy immediately ran to his daughter and said that you can't interfere in royal affairs without permission, but the king didn't get angry. Still, it was nice, and her daughter inherited a good heart. Here's the count. But still, the king told this sweet girl that what happens in the palace is the responsibility of its master, so this should not happen again. The prince continued to remain silent until the king sent him away, mentioning his low birth again. As the prince left, he cast some angry look at Abel, and she didn't know what to do. Should she have followed him? But that made him even angrier. Abel thought about the situation for a long time and felt guilty. After all, he had been hurt because of her. The king's unacceptable behavior becomes fodder for a future villain, a villain who grows up experiencing violence and neglect and considers human life less important than the flowers growing on the side of the road. It's ruined. Abel was excited about their first meeting, and in the end, the king ruined everything. All she wanted was to live happily ever after with her family, but reality makes it difficult. Abel decided to emphasize Plan B. In this situation, taking the money and finding asylum in another country is the best solution. But there is one problem. A lot of money is spent on maintaining this uselessly huge mansion, and there is no extra money even to ask for asylum. She asked her brother San what she thought about living in another country. He didn't mind, but he doubted that his father would allow it. Abele said she made such a huge mistake that she would grit her teeth in anger even after 10 years and live happily ever after, and then suffer nightmares 20 years later. Not to say she did anything terrible. It's not entirely her fault, but she's the one who should apologize, so she should be sincere. Sometime later, this man would find children in the slums, whom he would then enslave. His face is too recognizable to move freely. He had invested a lot of money in the business, but the attitude was just awful, and now he didn't know what to do. Walking down the street, he suddenly saw a child with pink hair. Such a girl could be sold for a huge price, so the man was immediately going to seize the moment. He walked over and asked what she was doing out here all alone. Abel said she was waiting. The man said it was unlikely that anyone would come here to see her. He had seen cases like this one, and the outcome is always the same. So he offered to take this girl some bread. She must have been missing. He tried to act all friendly, but Abel punched him right in the nose with her fist and told him to get lost. The blow was so hard that the man even fell down, but he was angry that the vile street rat had dared to raise his hand against him. That's when he pulled out a knife and told her she would pay for getting involved in adult business. He ran at this little girl with a knife and stabbed. He only managed to cut off one strand of her hair. Abel's head came back from the blow, bouncing up a few meters, and was just laughing at this loser. And when she was already falling down, she kicked him hard. The man regretted everything he'd ever done in his life. It turned out he was on the verge of death. He couldn't understand why this creep was so strong, and he was already on the verge of consciousness. Abel walked over to him with the rope and said, "Don't puzzle your head over it. Human trafficking is just a business and prison is just a room," she told him, then dragged him to one place. Toward morning, she finally got this criminal to one very good place. She asked where to put the wanted criminal who was lying outside, a question that really puzzled people. When they went to look, they realized it was indeed a wanted criminal. How could a kid bring him here in his condition? Abel finally asked for a reward for her work, hopefully. And she asked, "Don't they deduct taxes on the reward?" Fortunately, there were no taxes, so they gave her money. Abel was saying weird things about how they had just taken the first step toward world peace. A sincere apology requires real sincerity. Thanks to her brother's advice, Abel had an idea. If trust is already broken and only resentment remains, a simple apology can only make things worse. The first guy will see Abel as indirectly responsible for that celebration. Even though it was the king's mistake, Abel can't just ignore it. The problem is that she got her first paycheck a few days ago, but what the prince needs is too expensive for her pocket. In the end, there's nothing left for her to do, but Abel lost 10 days looking for the wanted man just because he was hiding well, but it was worth it in the end because she got a lot of money. This money had been earned with so much hard work that Abel really wanted to put it to work for herself, and she would even be able to run an entire market with sand. But unfortunately, she had a different goal in mind. Absolutely everything was about making up for the terrible impression she'd made on the first prince. So she came to an expensive store. She picked out a very interesting item and asked me to wrap it as a gift, but such services are not provided here. However, seeing her distraught face, he couldn't refuse the girl. His greatest fear was that she had to sell the heirloom for the purchase. Abel, after 10 days of constant surveillance and constant running around, but she was able to buy a gift. It is so expensive that she has spent absolutely all her money and not even left to pay for the trip. Her father rides to the palace on horseback, and she has to walk. Abel was a little annoyed about this, because the king doesn't just refuse to help people, he makes their lives harder. Guards guard the entrance to the palace, but getting in would not be a problem. On foot, Abel finally reached the palace. She approached a guard and told him that her father worked here and she missed him very much. She ended up being let into the palace very easily, even though the king lives there. Abel made it quick, not even bumping into anyone besides the one guarding the entrance. That's very good. And then you get to meet the prince. Mystery. Even though this is supposedly the place where he lives, it's very empty. Abel was just walking through the woods and suddenly found the prince. He was sitting under a tree reading a book, as if he were doing photosynthesis. But if you leave a book out in the sun and it's raining outside, Abel told him as she stepped closer. The prince hadn't expected to meet her here, and he'd told her last time that this was no place for the likes of her. He could say that this territory is exclusive to the prince. The remote palace, too figuratively, belongs to the first prince, but the power of right belongs to the king. So the king decided to take responsibility for Abel's injury and decided to hit his own son. Cruelty. And since the prince knows his situation, he couldn't do anything about it. A prince who can't even come give on the old courts to sign up. In the first instance, Abel apologized to him for the situation. Even though it wasn't her fault, she was the reason he had to get in trouble. He didn't know what she was talking about, and she couldn't say outright that his father was a total disaster, stirring up anger on him. In any case, she quickly changed the subject. She said they would meet again, and so they did. She immediately handed him a present. She said it was a change gift, though she had no reason to feel guilty, so she gave it as a token of friendship. But the prince didn't even pick it up and immediately threw it on the ground. Abel was almost mad, because it was a high-quality artifact that she couldn't buy even if she had saved up her allowance for a year. She immediately ran to that box and picked it up. Now it was soiled and crumpled, causing Abel to yell at this heartless prince. He has no idea how much she put into this gift. For him, she opened this box. Luckily, the artifact was fine. The stone had retained its color. Abel told the prince that it was a disposable item that needed to be handled very carefully. But Cesar had no trust in this girl to accept such gifts. Another plan was to make up for the lack of trust with a gift, but in the end it was left worse, and the prince became even more wary. Abel went through 10 days of hell just to buy that gift. She stayed up nights wandering the streets to find that criminal, and it just made her want to cry. The prince didn't understand or know how difficult it was for her. Abel decided that today just wasn't her day. She apologized for coming uninvited, but still asked to accept this gift, a self-defense artifact with a warranty and manual. This gift is absolutely safe because with its help, you can protect yourself in case of danger. Abel was even willing to stake her non-existent honor on it. Cesar seemed to be starting to believe her a little. Plus, he noticed early on her hands. Abel was about to leave, but said she'd get back to him next time. But no sooner had she left than she ended up having tea with everyone. She felt like she was going to throw up, but everything was delicious. She didn't bother to explain what she was doing at all, and the tea party with the king was again very spontaneous. She bumped into him again, sitting next to her father. Disregarding the overseers, gaining the king's favor wasn't so bad after all, but her father's superior. The king was already completely enamored with her and couldn't let go of how she made it to the palace without her daddy. She told me how walking nearby, the children had inherited strong legs from their father. The king was so enchanted that he offered to let her finish her tour of the neighborhood, and she could not refuse the chance. For pretending that he had lost track of her, led to a remote palace, was a bad idea. She remembers getting lost last time, where the trees are tall and lush, an atmosphere of tranquility and beauty. She would like to be there again, but it seems to be the site of a remote palace, and it is best not to walk there. The king said there was only one way she could get there at any time. She could be the girlfriend of the first prince she'd seen recently. Papa began to worry at once, for it would be too great a responsibility for his daughter. Abel is too young and reckless to be the companion of the first prince. But while he was trying to protect his daughter, she said she agreed and could handle it. And the king, and again what she would say there, so he suggested it. His intentions were unclear, but it seemed to suit Abel perfectly. And now that she had a legitimate reason, there was no point in hesitating anymore. A while later, she wore a dress with 5 layers of lace, as if she were going to a wedding or fighting a dragon to protect the world. All in all, she looked more solemn than usual today. Her brother immediately realized that she wanted to meet the first prince today and advised her to keep her mouth shut and return home sooner rather than later. Here she finally made her way to the first prince, introduced herself to him again, but he offered to drop the formalities. In this remote palace, there are hardly any chairs and not a single piece of cake even in the reception area. There are no onions in sight either. The first prince was doubtful, but it turned out to be true that Abel would be his companion. She took a lot of things with her because she didn't know what he would like. But the prince started acting petty and even giving her orders, so she was so restricted that she just stopped listening to him. She said that forming relationships with peers is extremely important during the childhood years, and in adolescence it also helps to develop empathy and consideration for others, all qualities that the prince is particularly lacking in. He didn't even want to talk about it and told Abel to turn around and leave. His temper is too complicated, so she decided to do his bidding. As she said that, she turned around and left, only she went to which side of the window as he told her. Now she was about to go out the window and even said goodbye to him. It really freaked him out, so he didn't let her jump out, and then in his arms for taking the order so literally. But Abel just wanted to build trust and prove she could do his bidding. He was really shocked. A party, noble ladies, receptions, this kind of behavior? But Abel wasn't noble at all. Dane Delafian saved the life of the king during the war, who was then a crowned prince. As a token of his gratitude and merit, He was awarded a non-hereditary title and mansion and was made a knight of the lowest rank in the royal household. It turns out that Abel is the daughter of a duke from a former barony. She's not even a full-fledged aristocrat. The prince was disappointed, for it seems the king wants to humiliate him by any means necessary, and this is one of his obvious attempts. He has sent as a companion a girl who is younger and almost just a glacier, and the reasons for this are obvious. He's teasing Cesar. For the second prince, he would definitely choose a highborn child, but he just doesn't like the first prince. Besides, Abel doesn't have a security girlfriend, so even if she gets hurt because of the prince, it won't trouble the king. Abel is a companion simply because of the circumstances, but even if that's really the case, it doesn't bother her at all. She's fine, because she has a principle. He warned her right away that she wouldn't be able to win his favor, but Abel didn't. She's not interested in political goals. She really just wants world peace. Love and tranquility are basic human values. The prince didn't want to listen to this nonsense anymore, and he didn't want her as his companion. But the only way to get rid of her is to talk directly to the king, because obviously he can't do that. So the only option was to befriend Abel, and she started that. It's been almost a month since then, and Abel comes to see the prince often enough, even bringing gifts and figuring out things for them to do. Despite his hungry, indifferent answers, she could already respond when he had an elevated mood. But despite his best efforts, the first prince's wariness still hadn't abated in the slightest. He refused the food she brought, but she still kept bringing different desserts with the hope that the prince would try it and like it. The food here left a lot to be desired. The prince doesn't touch the food of outsiders. Abel honestly felt sorry for him. She thought he might get a headache from reading all the time, so she brought him something more fun, a game. Some time ago, she managed to find out that the first prince has no servant or teacher and who could give him lessons in basic etiquette. In other words, he is completely abandoned and neglected. It's unknown how he learned to read and learned the basics of etiquette. But this kid reads all day long. Abel was very worried that he would mess up his eyes and nerves so badly. He himself might have been the perfect hidden character, but this way he would be a hidden character with scoliosis. He lacks social skills because he sits all day long with his head in a book. This is also the reason why he is so violent and will kill his whole family in the future. Abel, and a month later, remembered that the prince had not even said his name. He had never once introduced himself. Now at last, Cesar Legracio has been named. But that's a very mediocre name for a man of royalty. No one here calls him by his first name, and the regulars can't do that either. So there's no point in a name. No one will call him by it anyway. However, Abel resented it. Status wasn't important to her. She'd like to call him by his first name. Then she started calling his name, Cesar, a lot. So much so that the prince even started to dislike it. But it would be nice if he liked his name a little more. Abel was going to be here until the prince started thinking she was cute. Usually all people think she's cute, but the prince feels nothing at the sight of her, and it's very frustrating. When his soul is bound, he will have something to breathe. He will surely think how good she is. She suggested that he play this game she brought, because then maybe they could get up closer. After playing a couple times naturally, Cesar Legracio wouldn't play with her. But she decided to see who would win first, him or her. Here, once again, she was going to the palace, but her younger brother approached her. He was alone, upset that she had been going to the palace every day lately and had stopped playing with him altogether. So he asked her to at least play together today. Abel couldn't say no to her sweet little son, who was used to acting very grown up. But now he offered to have fun. So Abel decided not to visit the prince in one day, thinking that nothing would happen. However, it was far from one day, and it had been a week. Her money had run out, and she just couldn't go to see the prince. Paying for trips and spending money on toys, it cost more than she figured. Until her father got the title, they were an ordinary family, so they didn't have a wagon. They only had a horse that belonged to her father. Abel can walk to the yard as much as she used to, but she's tired of wasting her strength and energy just getting around. But it's all because of that damn king. He decided to hire a companion for his son, but didn't even think to provide a strip. If he was a man who was conscious of his responsibilities, he would never have locked his 12-year-old son in a separate palace. If Abel was a high-ranking aristocrat, she would never experience such disrespect. I wonder what's on Cesar Legracio's mind. An illegitimate child of the king, living in a separate palace and belonging to himself? Even if he becomes an important person who will destroy the entire faction in a few years, right now he's just a child who hasn't even reached puberty. And the more Abel thought about it, the more the woods got worse. Every time she went to see the prince, he just ignored the sight of her, and she ended up remembering only the bad parts. Of course, she remembered that he was just a boy with countless injuries. Time has a hold on everything. Even the hardest stones, are worn down by water. Abel hoped her incredible cuteness would melt his heart like ice in the spring. The younger brother noticed that Sis really wants to send his palace, so he even offered to lend her some money. He doesn't get an allowance, but he has been saving the money his father once gave him. He saved absolutely everything because there was nowhere to spend it. And anything could happen. Even Abel is as financially literate as her 8-year-old brother, but she wouldn't take money from him. It was better to keep saving, and suddenly he had one very good idea. And now she is in the most huge bookstore on a busy street with Sana. She had promised to give him something in a moment if he would go with her. But as an older sister, she couldn't let her little brother, who isn't even 10 years old, walk alone. So she drove him to the bookstore and was going to wait outside herself, but somehow he didn't believe it. And his face was the same as his father's when he doubted Abel. Even though a word with growth told her sister some obvious rules about not hanging around alone on the street and not going with anyone who offers her candy. Sana is acting like an adult again. Abel was sure she was old enough and nothing would happen, but something did happen. She accidentally walked into a place she shouldn't have walked into. She came running at the sound of a child screaming. This huge bookstore is too big, and there are many hidden doors, and you can't see what's going on inside. Abel thought Sana had been kidnapped, so she somehow ran into this strange place. But after making sure it wasn't hers, she turned back but was about to leave. However, a man grabbed her arm. Abel tried to threaten, saying that if he backed down now, she would ignore this disrespect he had shown. The guy even thought it was probably a princess or someone of that high status, and Abel only lost. The other bandits holding the child also tensed up. After all, jokes were not good with aristocrats or royalty, so it would be better to let this girl go right now and then just get rid of this boy. But then they remembered that this kingdom doesn't even have a princess. Abel had promised her father she wouldn't get her hands dirty in blood again, but now she had no choice. Since it would be her blood, it was no big deal. She quickly already gathered with those kidnapping bandits and called the guards, putting all the responsibility on them. She was able to run fast with this boy afterward, and he was grateful that she had helped him out. At first he thought she was trying to escape, but then he realized that her goal was to lax to help him. In fact, she really did want to escape because it wasn't her little brother who was in trouble. But still she helps him, the boy, and he didn't understand how she could be so strong. Abel said she'd been a premium child since she was born and was even taller than him now. He immediately wanted to gloss over his status, but forgave her because she saved him. As a thank you, he wanted to repay her and put something in her hand. Abel saw the gold ruby brooch and was shocked. It would be cool to turn down such a valuable gift. She asked the boy why he was so generous. Then he said that with this thing, she would always be able to recognize him when they met again. He would be sure to repay her properly. At this point, she finally said goodbye to the unknown blonde guy with red hair and ran to her brother. Sana finally came out of the store and bought everything he needed. Abel suggested that he stop somewhere else before he went home. Living as the daughter of a baron who can't even inherit a title, she's tired of messing with people like that. So that boy said they could meet again. But by what signs would she recognize his face if he was hooded the whole time? So she went with her brother to the store to sell this brooch and make a lot of money. And after a while, she started going to the prince again, and he had no idea what effort it had cost her to travel here. She couldn't even describe it. Today she baked cookies for him and brought a few other interesting things. But Cesar was annoyed, and all for the fact that she came whenever she wanted and never once came when she needed to. Abel asked, "Did the prince miss you?" He immediately raised his gaze and looked at her, thinking he had misheard her. But Abel said she missed him too, and then he lowered his gaze in embarrassment. Abel tells him that there will be a foundation festival all over the kingdom. The prince had heard about it, but he couldn't go. He was sure that Abel would suggest that he sneak in and watch. But no, she's not. After all, she's going to the festival with her brother and father to have a lot of fun. As much as she likes the prince, she can't attend every minor event. This answer ended up making him very angry, so much so that he even threw a pillow at her. She had told him many times that you can't throw things, people can be hurt. Even if it hadn't happened before, she might still hurt herself and not come to his palace next time. Would he really be happy then? When she asked that, he flinched but didn't say anything. Abel got upset. thinking that she really wanted her to stop going to him, and he didn't even know how much she worked to meet him as soon as possible. Chesar blushed and asked why she was not coming. She decided to take the opportunity and started crying that if it was not possible, she would have come to him every day, but she couldn't because of the difficulties she was facing. Eventually, she got to the point and said she just didn't have the money to pay for the wagon to get here. Rich families have money, but she is not from a rich family. Another palace knight, so he has one horse, but he uses it himself to get to work. So there is no choice but to take public transportation that the commoners ride in. The prince listened to all of this in shock, not even thinking about it. Abel drives a wagon full of people and still has to pay, and will she go there and back every day? Her money got scarcer and scarcer, and eventually she ran out. Chesar really didn't know that she made that much effort to come here every day. Of course he didn't know, because she never said. But who cared? Sometimes she walked here. The whole way from the house to the second palace was no trouble because the road was wide and clear, but the prince was still shocked because she was walking all alone. After all, she had no one to accompany her. In the end, after learning all this, his mood was ruined. He even felt some guilt. Abel suggested he go outside so he wouldn't get depressed. It would have been nice to go for a walk, but he didn't want to. He thought of something better, and then he took her to the stables. This place is occasionally used by the royal children's servants, given a horse for a decade, so the prince's horse is here. Abel was a little upset. The prince's horse is kept in the stables by a servant. She apparently takes great care of her. Chesar was willing to borrow Abel his horse. It was very kind of him. He did not want his companion to ride in a public carriage. You could tell he was worried and didn't want people looking down on her. Abel was very grateful to him, no matter what his true feelings were. At least he cared about how she was being treated. Compared to their first meeting, this is huge progress. There's just one problem. She can't ride a horse. She was already tired of sitting on the couch all the time. All she needed was the right amount of exercise and some sunshine. And so she was already riding with the prince on a horse. He handled the horse very well, even though it was only a foal. And Abel protested against reading books on horseback and tried to practice riding a horse. But it seems that this was the wrong approach because the prince learned just like that, and that's what he accomplished. Abel was finally able to have fun with the prince, not even afraid to fall off the horse. They were enjoying this ride, and then they saw something in the distance. No one knew what this place was. Even the prince had never been there. Abel would offer to go there right now, and if anyone said anything, she'd punish them both. But soon Abel regretted her action and the fact that she had suggested that the prince come into the place. And here it was very beautiful and unusual, and the prince looked excited, like a man visiting a greenhouse for the first time. He has never traveled this far and never left the outhouse, but he really likes the place now, and he looks cute. A child who doesn't even dare to touch the flowers, but only observes them. It's hard to believe that he once killed his own family, as well as other noble families. But Abel is going to stop that from happening. They walked on, but suddenly realized that they were not alone here. They saw the one and only Queen Pelsia Lagracio. Her face immediately changed, as if she had seen the most disgusting thing that spoiled the whole landscape. Namely, she saw the first prince. He, of course, greeted her, to which she immediately began to insult and humiliate him, telling him not to stand there because the blood of his ghostly mother was spoiling him. Chesar at times like this could only apologize for the punishment. Abel was shocked that the queen would say such a thing. She thinks the palace belongs only to her, even though it's the residence of the entire royal family, and it's normal for a prince to walk through his own house. The queen starts a fight over nothing. But most importantly, she didn't even notice Abel. She just insulted the first prince, because he was given a place in the palace. But every day he gets more and more insolent and only spoils the prestige of the family. And the queen, as the eldest, felt obliged to teach him to realize his worthlessness. Abel was in shock. She just prayed the queen would stop. For the first prince tolerates the royal family's cold attitudes only to wipe them out with one blow after another. Abel had worked hard all this time to soften him up, communicating with a smile and kindness. And now, one full person has removed everything in cold water. Why are they doing this to a child who is just starting to get back on his feet? The queen was just blaming the little child for her low origin, although the only one she should blame is her husband who couldn't contain his bottom. How does the queen not see that murderous look in the child's eyes and realize that he's already devising a plan to kill her? Abel couldn't let the situation go, so she intervened sharply. She shifted her attention to herself and greeted the queen while holding the prince's hand. She introduced herself to the queen and started talking about how beautiful the place was. She didn't know how she always got there and didn't think the little ones would place the queen's spirit, so she apologized. Abel even pointed out the rudeness of the queen, but immediately said how much she admired her and was very happy to see her. So the atmosphere in the text changed immediately. Everyone was delighted with this sweet girl. The queen liked Abel and would even be happy to meet her next time. In the end, they were able to part on a peaceful note. And so it's been a few days since then, and the national festival has finally begun. Cesaro was very bored at this point. He never looked out of the window, but for some reason he had picked up such a bad habit. He thought about the fact that Abel must be partying with his family right now because she was telling him so much about this festival and how she was going to party. She was acting like she was more mature than him, and it was very annoying. And then the prince began to think only negative thoughts. She acts as if she's not just being kind because she wants to be, and there's no way anyone would linger around a despicable prince out of the goodness of their heart. She must have an ulterior motive, but the prince still has no way of knowing what her purpose is. He thought about it over and over, waited day and night for the moment when Abel Delafian would reveal his true intentions. Waiting for the day she starts mocking the prince and takes off her mask. But no matter how hard he tried to stay on guard and keep his guard up, this girl kept on behaving. Suddenly, very suddenly, she came to him at this late hour. The room was dark, but she turned on the light so that the prince would not ruin his sight. He was shocked that she came, because she said she was going to go to the festival today, but it turns out she already had a great time. It's not even dinner time yet, but the moon is still high and the others have decided to have a fireworks show. It's an amazing spectacle that costs a lot, so Abel came here to suggest that the prince watch the fireworks together. She also brought with her a variety of lovely desserts. The prince didn't usually eat them, but today he decided to try them. It's a girl 2 years younger than him, but acts so mature. Although she is a troublemaker, she treats him like a little brother. That had always been the case, but today that fact was particularly troubling to him. If Abel had been planning to kill Cesar, this moment might be the perfect opportunity to give him poison along with the dessert. Even so, he still decided to taste what she was giving. The sugar-coated strawberries were sugary enough to make his tongue numb. Abel constantly acted like he knew everything in the world and did everything as if he could read the prince's mind. It made him irritated sometimes. Today, in fact, Abel didn't just come here to bring him treats. In fact, she brought him something fun because he had never been to a festival before. She had purposely saved up her allowance for him and would have put in all her effort to prepare this and even piqued his real interest. In her bag, she pulled out something, and then when she turned around, her face was like that of a monster. It was so unexpected that the prince was even frightened. She was offering to play a very popular game, which is why she wore such a mask. Abel personally acted out a skit she saw at the festival, and she was really good at it. She had great acting skills. She even sang. An aristocrat, hardly distinguished from a commoner, would not show kindness for nothing. Cesar didn't understand why he never forgot it and remained wary. But still, no matter what Abel's goal might be, she was putting in too much effort, and he felt unworthy of such dedication. Even his own parents, who wanted him dead, never took decisive action, only played cheap tricks. You don't have to try so hard. But why is Abel acting like this? It even occurred to the prince that perhaps she was the last bit of love his father had left him. Although it's impossible still, when she was here, the prince wasn't bored. Abel is very tired, and will you forgive me? She didn't know what the prince liked, so she had to be prepared for anything. Luckily, she was watching this one-actor movie from the front row, so she held the performance for the prince without difficulty. Children are delicate and fragile creatures. That's why Abel can fearlessly handle the future genius that is the first prince. But because children are delicate, wounds also heal very easily. This future genius is not afraid of anything, and it's annoying. If the wounds received now are not treated properly, everything will only get worse, and scars will remain, which will remind of themselves even in adulthood. Abel watched the show and very carefully memorized everything with her eyes, so she could show it to the prince later. In the end, it wasn't all for nothing, because he had a lot of fun. Afterwards, they talked and joked together for a long time. Suddenly, the fireworks started. It was a very beautiful sight. Abel looked at it all, realizing that her father had paid taxes for everyone to look at this beauty, but maybe it wasn't even for nothing. The prince had never looked at fireworks either, because there was no occasion. Now he was enjoying himself while he could. He'd thought Abel wouldn't come like this and be with her family throughout the festival, but she couldn't do that anyway. Her father could hardly spare the time. He'd be going to work the night shift tonight, and her brother was too weak, so they'd already come home. The prince was tired and wondered what about Delafion's mom. Abel said she was in a very faraway place, and the prince only sympathized. He knew what that meant, because his mom was also in a very faraway place right now. Abel thought there was a huge misunderstanding, but she decided not to say anything for now. There was nothing more terrifying than a child who'd lost his mother and been forgotten by his father. Since Abel doesn't remember anything about her mom, she has no such sense of affection, but the prince is genuinely sorry. If she digs a little deeper into Chisar's soul, who can pretend to share his feelings and soothe him the way he wants? Even though he said he didn't miss his mom, she still took his hand to comfort him and let him know that she would be there for him now. And after meeting the queen, he flatly refuses to cross the border of the remote palace. Sadly, that evening at the fireworks had made a lasting impression on him, and now he's even decided to give Abel some riding lessons. She was really bad at it, and he was often angry, but it was fun nonetheless. Abel was actually doing very well, listening and learning faster than the prince expected, as she is not afraid of heights. A sharp rise doesn't scare her either. She's also very confident that she won't fall off the horse no matter what happens. As they drove up and already saw that greenhouse, they realized it was time to turn around and go back. As always, it was only a matter of time before they got close to the greenhouse, and the prince wanted to turn back, but Abel didn't blame him for that. She remembered she had something important to report. She won't be able to visit him for a while, though she realizes he'll feel the loneliness of the emptiness and absence of his best friend, but she can't come because she has a meeting. She's going to meet her friends for the first time in a long time, and it's going to be fun. The prince was shocked to find out that she had friends, because she had never talked about it. That's not really what Abel meant. There are no real friends at meetings like this, and it's just empty words. But unfortunately, she can't miss this meeting because she's doing it for her father. A small social gathering. Children whose fathers are knights in the kingdom go there. Most of the knights come from noble families, and only a few, like earls, are given titles. Speakers, in other words, at this event, Abel will be treated like a commoner among the aristocrats. It seemed easy not to go, but you can't just do what you want. If the only one absent is Delafion's daughter, people might start spreading rumors about her father. Abel asked the prince to think of her and wait for her coming and not to shut himself in again because of her absence. He could at least go out into the garden, sit in the sun like before. Abel was more worried about the prince than about this ridiculous meeting. Her father was very responsible about the event, again voicing many rules for Abel. But he was actually very trusting, and believed that she would be able to find friends of her own age there. He really believes that noble children will sincerely communicate with each other. Abel certainly won't be the one to disappoint and tell the truth, but she will be the one to win over everyone. And it's been a little while since this meeting started. Abel had already been challenged to a duel because she was simply insufferable, and she certainly wasn't going to refuse. It was just what she had been waiting for.